You are Locked On Coogs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
My question for you then is, can Houston do that? Or do they have something in their back pocket? Maybe you don't want to give it away completely here because I'm sure TJ watches this. I'm sure
totally.
he does.
Yeah, Odd loves me, I'm sure.
Yeah, I know he does. Yeah. But what can Houston possibly do? Or are they just fine? Because they are kind of the top dog in the conference right now. Everyone's kind of looking Houston's way.
So it's interesting because Houston's obviously a very defensive-minded team, and I've likened Sampson to Belichick in a lot of ways because I think it's a comparison people understand. Belichick, as a head football coach in New England, was always taking away your number one receiver and making you be in with somebody else. And what Sampson does really well, whether it's the point guard of West Virginia or Caleb Love or whoever it is, he finds a way to make you beat him without your best player scoring a bunch of points. So, like, I don't know what that looks like against Iowa State because intuitively I'd go, okay, point totals, Curtis Jones getting most points per game, Houston's going to lock him up, make you beat him with somebody else. But I also remember last year's game with Momcilovic. I remember Taman Lipsey being a all-conference player last year. I thought he was really impressive. Keyshawn Gilbert, you mentioned, has had some great games in this different win streaks they've had. And so I don't know what the answer is as far as one guy you take away to make them play with a hand tied behind their back. I do think, Momcilovic is hitting 43% of threes. I got the stats board right here. He's shooting 5 threes per game at 43%. That's really hard to stop when the guy's also 6'8". Yeah. And I almost wonder if you say, hey, let's just work on Curtis Jones. He's a much more manageable matchup. He's a 6'4", 6'5" guard who does it a couple different ways, but he's much more approachable, if that makes sense.
And to your point, he's had 1 of 7 games. I mean, he's not going to, he just doesn't shoot lights out every single night. He will make you pay. He's scored 30 or close to it, but I mean, he's not always on.
Well, and so if you were to take Curtis Jones away, and just say, hey, Momcilovic has to score 45 to get us tonight. He might be able to do it. He's really good. I just don't know if they will. Keyshawn Gilbert's an interesting matchup too to me, because there's just only so many guys you can throw out there. I think in my scouting report, I think Gilbert's going to actually get the LJ Cryer treatment as far as getting covered by Cryer. And I say that because I think that's probably Cryer's gotten a lot better as defender at Houston, but he's probably the weakest of the 3 out there. I don't know. But I don't know who. I mean, because I got to put someone good on Momcilovic. He's going to play the 3, right? I got to put someone good on Curtis Jones. I don't know. I don't know where else I'd go with that. This could easily. I mean, Houston hasn't played a lot of track meets this year. This could turn into one of those. If it turns into a track meet, is that going Iowa State's way?
Well, we've basically had 1 track meet, and it was kind of the same thing with Houston versus Utah. You come off the loss, and you just blow the doors in on your next opponent. Iowa State loses to West Virginia, goes and scores 108 against UCF. I mean, it was truly shot for shot for a lot of that game. So I do think they can win games like that. But I don't think Otts will let it get that way. I think he's very much a defensive-oriented coach the same way that Houston is. But I don't know. I mean, you never know. They can hang, but I don't know if they'll want to. So
this weekend is a College GameDay game, which is a big deal for Houston. Houston doesn't get these a whole lot. I anticipate having a fairly big crowd there. I anticipate, whether it's because it's an afternoon game or whatever, I think the partying from College GameDay is going to feed right into the arena, right? I think all that helps Houston. Iowa State has, of their losses, a couple of these are on the road. Does that road environment bother you at all? I mean, Houston's lost a home game. They're actually undefeated on the road this year. Does that bother an Iowa State fan at all?
Actually, maybe I'm just wrong on this one. I think this helps Iowa State more than it helps Houston. The start of Iowa State's win streak these last 4 games was a College GameDay in Ames. Why was College GameDay at Iowa State TCU? I don't know. I couldn't tell you that. But but they're used to it a little bit. And so I'd be curious to see, you say, like, doesn't happen a lot in Houston. TJ was on, that little set actually earlier this year. So I don't think the college game day thing is going to add too much. Now, being on the road in Houston, certainly a challenge. I'm not putting anything past that. But the college game day atmosphere, I don't think is something that Iowa State's like too scared of. But I will say, I mean,
Someone
play on the road
clip
in the Big
that.
12 is tough.
Someone listening, clip that. Not scared of the college game day atmosphere. Send that to the entire campus.
Yep.
Let it be known. Nick said, "No, I'm new guy. Nick.
Well,
New guy. I'm sorry.
The funny thing was, at the beginning of the season, like, this team's going to be able to handle the number 2 ranking, and then, well, we're still in the top 10, but not able to handle the number 2. Now, speaking of Houston, it's interesting. You look at the rankings here, and it's not that far off. What is it, 8, and you guys are 5? Is that right?
Yeah, 5 in the AP and
8 in
coaches,
the
I
AP.
think. Yeah,
And ESPN has this being like an 80% Houston win. Now, what is ESPN like? That's just whatever. But I'm curious. I don't think I've asked you. Do you think this is going to be close then? Or is this a repeat of last year?
I think it's a single digits game, not a one possession game.
Hmm.
I think it's the kind of thing where Houston might be up 4, gets a stop, gets fouled. The free throws make it 6 or 8 or whatever in the final. I am picking Houston. I pick Houston to win. I've been wrong on something. If I'm being fully transparent, I thought Houston would beat Tech by double digits and lost by 1 in overtime without JT Toppin, right? Like, I've been wrong before on this team.
Yeah.
I thought the UCF we mentioned earlier was going to be a 20-point win. But I do think that Houston's got this matchup. I think the other thing too is about, like, I don't think there's any aspect of this game because it's game day, because it's 2 teams at the top of the conference, because it's a team that had a winning record against them last year. There's not many of those teams across college basketball. Houston got retribution against everyone else besides Duke. They played in the Sweet 16s. You don't get to see anybody after that. And then Iowa State, they played 3 times and lost twice. Houston understands kind of, I think, what's on the table here. And then also, if I'm being frank, I think they're more likely to go all out and spin their legs in this one and look tired on Monday against Texas Tech than hold anything back. They have a quick turn to play Saturday afternoon at home against Iowa State and then in Lubbock on Monday night. That's a pretty rough stretch of like just over 48 hours. And
Yeah.
I think they're just more likely to expend it all on Saturday and let the cards fall on Monday as they fall. But that's kind of where I'm at. Are you predicting? I mean, you're going to predict an Iowa State win, I assume. Are you predicting a close one? What are you thinking?
I'm kind of in the same boat. Honestly, the really close ends up getting to a free throw, larger point of margin of victory there. We've seen Iowa State really excel at the free throw line in the last few games, Colorado being the exception because that was just a weird game, led by 15 the entire time. So I very well could see it being that. You mentioned, obviously, where is Houston going to stop Iowa State? And I'm going to pivot here because this, to me, is the biggest, just what's the word I'm looking for? But like flagstick game. Like what is Iowa State made of? What is this team capable of now that Milan is back on the floor, full strength? We're past the 7-game skid, whatever that whole thing was. We are now looking postseason. Now, you got Arizona and granted Kansas State on the remaining slate here. I am personally, now I don't know if this is where odds is at, looking at this game as this is a great where are we game. Is this team a Final Four team? Is Houston or are you looking at this the same way for Houston? Obviously, a very tough final few games as well.
Well, I look at this as Iowa State Saturday, Texas Tech Monday, as I just mentioned. This weekend, and this is spoiling my Friday show a little bit, but this feels like a Sweet 16, Elite 8,
yes,
Final Four championship game. That turnaround, those 2 games in a 3-day window, is how you prepare for that kind of a thing. And if they go 1-1, if they go 0-2, getting that in this weekend in February is a big deal. Right.
You kind of make me jealous. That's a great point.
Well,
wish we had that.
Because the truth is that, like, you don't get a whole lot of those opportunities. It's why you play in the Big 12, right? You don't get a whole lot of those opportunities in the American. And, the first 2 rounds might not be like that, especially for a team that'll get a seed like Houston, Iowa State will, right? But the Sweet 16 Elite 8 thing, having a turnaround, having to, I guess you at least know your opponent for the second game in this instance. but play a really good team in a hostile environment in the second game. I think that's really, really good for Houston to get in, even if it doesn't go their way. I'm personally think that they can and should win both games, but I could also see a world where, again, I think the team that wins this conference has 2 or 3 losses, and Houston's only got one in conference so far. So I think it's coming at some point.
Well, I can tell you, Iowa State's going to give it everything they got. They're coming, man.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect anything less from Otts and the boys. Now, this is Thursday. You got more previews tomorrow, I'm sure, and then live after the game. Tell people what's all going on with Iowa State these days, because y'all are also talking everything else in the Cyclone world.
Oh, yeah. Well, Cyclone Athletics on the top of the world right now. Obviously, you mentioned Otts. Like, we got extended. We got him extended. Matt Campbell extended. We'll obviously be covering all the Iowa State football stuff. So, you Houston lovers out there, we're coming. It's going to be a repeat of last year every single year. We'll cover that here. And then at Nick Marv on Twitter, where I give out my thoughts during the games, which are definitely something.
Definitely something. You find me at Painter512 on all socials, but the same kind of thing. Wherever you find your Cyclone stuff, you can find your Coug stuff there with Locked On Cougs as well. Thank you all for tuning into the crossover today. Going to be a fun one Saturday. Breathe,
Deep breaths.
Parker.
Deep
Breathe.
breaths.
Breathe. Go Cougs, folks. Go Cougs.